Greetings, everybody. This is Leviathan here, and today I've got an update from the world of Diablo 3. Here on the official website, we have a developer insight blog, balancing and class set design. I like that they now have to specify which game it is that they're talking about, because now we get developer insights from Diablo 4, Diablo 3. We did have a little bit of a note from Nevelistus mentioning that there will be a Diablo 4 quarterly blog coming. They're trying to do one each quarter of 2020, so that means hopefully in February, maybe in March most likely, if they want to give themselves the most time, we'll get that update. But not to bury the lead here, we have this developer insight blog from the world of Diablo 3, and it's discussing particularly balancing and set design. I'll put a link to this blog post in the video description, so feel free to go and check that out. I'm not going to read the whole thing in its entirety, but I do recommend that you do so. We're just going to pick and choose some of the highlights here. And Nevelistus just kind of starts out, well, technically this is written by the Diablo 3 team, mind you, but I believe this is written actually by Nevelistus in, the words of the team. Mentions that because they have a lot going on in Sanctuary with multiple games and such, this is from the D3 team, enjoy. So they've been working on, we've gotten some content, right? We know for certain that we're going to get one new set for each class. So far we've gotten the Crusader and the Monk, and there are more to come. We'll be seeing previews of those with PTRs. Right now, we're in the midst of Season 19. Seems so crazy to say such a high number. And Season 20 and patch 2.6.8 will be coming hopefully soon. And the PTR for both, or for the patch, should be popping up any day now. We're kind of in the midst of the middle of this season, so it's about time when the PTR does show its face. When that happens, I'll show you guys the patch notes. I'll do some streams of the new stuff, whatever sets we'll get, things that I can showcase and test out, and we'll see where we go from there. That being said, they cover essentially that, and also mention that, they got the new sets, and Whirlwind for Barbarians, just out of control, super improved, and they're not done yet. This is a little bit of insight as to what goes into their decision making when it comes to these PTRs, balancing, sets, etc. So, starts out with Paragon and Greater Rift levels. This is basically just them talking about their philosophy of how they take feedback, how they look at results and try to be data-driven when they're making earmarks for what's going to get changed, whether that's something that needs to get nerfed because of a certain player application that they didn't anticipate, or if it's something that's just clearly lagging behind everybody else, whether that actually comes from a class itself in terms of its aggregate clears for Greater Rifts, or a particular set within a class. They're looking at a number of different things because, as you know, as a Diablo player, so many things go into Greater Rift clears, into how a class plays, feels, different builds that are there for different reasons, right? Between your speed farming with regular rifts, Greater Rift speed farm, group builds, solo builds, so on and so forth. They mentioned that, they get feedback from many forums, places, build guides, gameplay from streamers, hey, that's me, leaderboards, and most importantly, they have their own data internally, and they can look beyond the just 1,000 players that they might see, or that we see on the leaderboards. So know that they're dealing with a far greater set of data than we are as a community from what we can see publicly. They're saying that it should be taken in a, none of the data, sorry, none of that data should be taken in a vacuum. It all comes together. And they do mention, because sometimes people mention on the PTR when things get changed or nerfed, they're like, oh, it was only this one guy with a crazy Paragon level that made that set so outstanding or made that clear insane. And they're just mentioning here that they understand that Paragon level factors in and directly impacts players. It's important that this is accounted for when we're comparing different points of data. The intended design and in-practice functionality of each class set is something that they also consider. So what does the set do best? Is it a Rift Guardian killer? Is it a ZDPS setup? Or does it lend itself to that? Is it something that's going to be better for just killing all the trash but horrible at elites? So they're looking at all these different factors that we as players are also looking at, and they're trying to understand if something needs to fill a role and that's fine, or if it needs to just do more altogether. Which is good to know sort of where they're coming from, because sometimes it can seem like the changes or the nerfs or the buffs that they make are random, but this is sort of trying to explain that there is a bit of data driven behind it. And some juicy stuff is coming up in just a moment. Something that they tried to avoid when they're talking about class balance is the seasonal buffs. They want those to sort of exist in their own microcosm. They want to be able to create incredibly exciting seasonal buffs, but not have that be the point that they balance around, because those will come and go, right? Each season we'll see something that's hopefully legit and really fun to play, and then it'll be gone. But you don't want now for your set for the Witch Doctor have been totally focused on that seasonal theme, and now it just breaks when that seasonal theme leaves. So they try to make sure that they understand it has high impact, but not to bounce around it. And that means that non-seasonal players have an especially apt time to help when it comes to balance, because, you know, non-seasonal is pretty stagnant in terms of how it changes. It's just the base without any of the extra doodads of seasonal themes. Some buffs could be better or worse for different classes, but since seasons effects are temporary, we're okay with this. So basically, you know, seasons are going to make things look very different, so they try not to think about it too much when it comes to that. And then the class comparison, this is something that we talk about a decent amount over the years in the community, is, oh, this class is lagging behind this class, so why is it that they can't just buff demon hunters altogether, right? That's something that I personally look at and see disparity. But at the same time, their hope is that they're not going to make every class exactly the same. They still need to keep the flavor of the classes, but also do keep each class within the realm of what they deem to be competitive, which they actually go on to talk about right here in bold. They want to see not every, but the ideal class set performance, so I guess technically every, would be GR 130 for solo. And this is assuming that a character has 5,000 Paragon levels, which definitely is a high number, but when you consider that they deem some of the best testing to come from non-seasonal, I had someone tweet at me about that, saying that seemed like a surprising number. Think about the fact that we're 19 seasons in, your Paragon experience rolls over each time that you do a season into non-seasonal, and we've been able to accomplish insane amounts of experience gain in all the seasons. So, I mean, particularly for the players that play group, they're reaching, you know, 4,000, 5,000 within a season, much less rolling it over from season to season. There are players that have reached the 10,000 Paragon mark, and of course those are much, much rarer fish in the sea. But scaling down from there in the 9,000 range, the 8,000 range, 7,000, which these are all above 5K, right? There are actually a good number of players that have gotten there just from the sheer amount of play that lends itself to continuing as the seasons have gone on. So this isn't a crazy figure when you really start to wrap your mind around it. And 130 is interesting because obviously we know the cap is 150, and groups are smashing that at this point. They're speed running 150s at this point. So with 130 being where they're trying to aim for things, that means any sets that come in the future and any sets that don't get there yet in terms of an average, they're all due for some improvement, right? And if they're close to that, then maybe they won't receive the most immediate improvement. But if they're very far off, they're not even touching or sniffing 130s, then, you know, definitely we'll see that. And it also works in the reverse. If it's something that's so awkwardly higher than 130 on average, Crusaders and stuff, then you're probably going to see some nerfs because they're trying to keep this one number that they're bouncing around. So that means everything that's low has to come up and everything that's high has to come down. So I thought that was kind of cool to see exactly what number they'd like to see players at and what they sort of expect. And again, that's, you know, non-seasonal. Seasonal throws all the curves off because a majority of players will not reach Paragon 5000 in season. Let's be real with that. And then also the seasonal themes, again, just add weird power and stuff. So it's not the best to balance around. But here we go. I found this table to be really cool to see. They gave us an average of where all the classes have landed if you assume that a player's at 5,000 Paragon, with just a few weeks into patch 2.6.7 non-seasonal play. So that 130 mark, that sweet spot, Barbs are right there, Crusaders way above, Demon Hunters falling behind, Monks right there, Witch Doctor right there, Wizard right there, Necromancer surprisingly out of line. And they've been thought to be one of the strongest classes since inception, since release. So that's kind of peculiar. But a thing to account for this, I do mention somewhere in here, is that there's also the idea of class popularity. And so some classes, especially when they have new toys, like the Crusader or the Monk, for instance, recently, they're going to be concentratedly played by a high number of players because everyone wants to try the new shiny thing. So that could also account for better results for a class, whereas Necromancer has been what it is for so long, you could see a lot of people maybe leaving it because they're tired of that playstyle or just looking to try something fresh or different. But the writing on the wall here is basically that, you know, do next for some upgrades are the Demon Hunter and the Necro, even if you were to adjust for more player popularity or whatever have you, other X factors that could be suppressing these numbers, they're still just behind. And then likely you'll see a Crusader nerf or some adjustment because they're way ahead. So you want to bring everyone back to that 130 line. And then for fun, they did a similar comparison in the same time frame in seasonal play, and many players hadn't reached 5,000 plus Paragon yet. This shows you the strength of the seasonal theme. And this seasonal theme is insane because it scales with your greater rifts. So the higher up you go, the more power you're essentially gaining. You can see Barbarians performing very well with the Whirlwind stuff. And that's another thing they did mention too, is that some of these numbers are, you have to take them all with a grain of salt and the other aspects of what goes into this, in that some sets, when they're super powerful, will also drive up a class's average GR clear, which means that the class in general is doing well, but that actually could mean the class doesn't have great set diversity, or it could still mean the class needs more love because there's just one build that's pushing them to get these, you know, average high clears, but you know, 3 other builds are just completely inadequate. So it's not the sort of end all be all, but it is a benchmark for them to look at. In any case, back to these seasonal numbers: Barbarian 135, Crusader 136, Demon Hunter lagging behind 124, Necro really lagging behind, Witch Doctor as well, Monk right up there 134, and then Wizard right at that sweet spot of 130. And this does make sense. Again, new set, new playstyle buff, and then Demon Hunter and Witch Doctor have been lagging behind for quite some time, and then Necro, I think, just unpopularity. So you know, these things all make sense to me. They say that they're aiming for these you know, milestones of 130 on average and such, but they recognize they aren't always going to hit it perfectly. There's a lot of mechanical details, and one change can ripple through other parts of the game, so they're definitely trying to be mindful. This next thing here is really cool. This shows us what they think in terms of what's acceptable. So if something is missing the mark, but it's only like 1 or 2 greater rifts behind, then that's pretty close and probably fine. And then there could be elements that push the numbers, you know, for one build to not quite reach that because someone fished for that perfect rift, or there's just a really skilled player or a couple of players pushing the echelon of what's possible for that class or that particular set. So this is something that they do keep an eye on, but this isn't like a critical threshold level yet, right? There's no alarms going off here. And 3 to 4 greater rifts plus or minus, so also, again, think about being over and under the thresholds or the aimed for mark. This is starting to get, maybe something's wrong here. They have to keep an eye on it, maybe some buffs, some nerfs, but not immediate action necessary, because you could still have some wiggle room here. And then once you're plus or minus 5 on greater rift levels away from that average sweet spot, that's really bad, because now you're super overperforming or super underperforming, and they will earmark these ones for change. So if at any point you find enough data on your own to conclude that something is way out of line to that degree, then you can likely guarantee that you'll see a buff for it. If not sooner than later, then certainly at some point as the development continues for D3. So this is all aggregated data, and the above tables cover overall class performance rather than individual class set performance. That was something I was mentioning before, in that, again, the better performing builds could help to equalize or make a class seem like it's better off than it currently is. So they do pay attention to that. They want to make set changes while thinking about all the data and the influence that's being placed on it. And that means, like, you know, class sets, Legacy of Nightmares, their changes come at set and item levels, so there's a lot to tinker with. And that's how they kind of get their general approach. This is something a lot of people have been wondering about, the Greater Rift 150 cap. This is not going to be bumped up. They have decided to keep the cap at 150. And the short answer for why is because it causes more problems than it solves if they were to increase it. Long answer, they have continued to expand endgame with additional, continuing to expand the endgame through additional greater if levels hasn't been the healthiest approach. At this late stage of game development, they want to focus on making current game the best game and most varied experience that it can possibly be. They hope to accomplish that by continuing to add new builds and then improving existing builds that have fallen behind. So if they have a cap, then that again allows them to have, okay, 150 is the top of the top, right? So if anything gets to that, you know, how powerful is it with the seasonal theme in mind, etc. And then where can we strive to get all those other builds and sets and such to that 130 mark? If you keep the cap increasing, then you undo essentially the work of whatever you had tried to bring into balance, because now there are going to be some builds that, you know, were already ready to go above and beyond 150. And then now you have tons and tons of ones that are minus 10, minus 15, minus 20 GRs behind. So I can get it. I can also see for some players that have been playing for a long time, especially for group, would love to see a cap increase because 150 is just 150. But they also did mention that they could even back away from it, which could spell out ensuing nerfs if they don't want players to be hitting 150 all the time and they want it to be a bit more competitive to get there again. It's all within their control based on how they move those numbers around, particularly for seasons when seasonal themes will come and go and be varying degrees of powerful. Last but not least is a mention about solo versus group. And they think that a common misconception is that there's balancing solely around 4-man groups. They take it into account, but group play is not their only focus since not all players enjoy groups. They want to make sure that the content design can be enjoyed by the most players, so they try to make sure they take both styles into account. One would be severely impacted if they neglected it for the other. They also mention ZDPS. They have decided that they don't want to encourage ZDPS, but they're not killing ZDPS builds either. It's a style of gameplay that some players like, but not all. And they think it's, you know, good that there are a number of unique ways to play. They're not wanting to take that away from players that do enjoy that style, because some people really do enjoy supports and helping out groups and stuff like that in their own specific way, if they're not just trying to amass the craziest amount of Paragon levels and DPS possible. Regardless of what they add, they know that the community is going to find ways to do things that they don't anticipate. They want to see it. So they're not adding new sets or anything to encourage pure support play, because at the end of the day, they want every player to feel powerful and every class set to sort of drive towards that purpose. But at the same time, if you find a build for it, more power to you. I actually forgot there's one more section here. It's called Creative Game Mechanics and Animations. So one thing that they talk about here is that there have been some weird things over the course of the history of Diablo 3. Snapshots, canceling skill animations, stutter stepping. One of the most egregious stutter step scenarios we've had in the past was the Blessed Hammer and Hexing Pants situation when that set was brand new. My God, it was such a horrible way to play, but it was the most powerful way to play. And luckily, they just made it not the most damaging way to play the build when they added in an item that was just strictly better, so you didn't want to use Hexing Pants. But it looks like they're trying to attack this in a more direct way, with a intentional call out on Bazooka Wizard and stutter stepping in general. They don't like the idea that there's some gameplay here that can impede their effort to create balance, and it makes it difficult for them to change some things without overly punishing classes that don't use these tactics, etc. So they're trying to go ahead and address it and make sure that at the same time that they take things away, that they're not leaving classes stripped of power, right? If a class got powerful based on a way that a player managed to game the system a little bit, they want to take it away. They're saying they're playing whack-a-mole with these things, but at the same time give you a replacement that's hopefully as powerful and, you know, plays within the way that they basically want you to. So in any case here, they're going to make sure to work on disabling some animation cancellation on certain skills. I'm guessing that might be a thing we see in the next patch. So Crusaders, they say, are the biggest culprit, likely subject to this change, but they're going to ensure, again, no class falls behind if they lose this trick. When they tackle that, then they're going to look and review and revisit other areas of the game with mechanics that are similar and could be having a negative impact. So basically look forward to potentially more of these sort of gamey things, snapshots, animation canceling, etc. being removed, and You know, they didn't even mention anything about removal here, but they did call out Bazooka Wizard by name, so you can imagine there will likely be a bit of a edit to that build as well. They tried to hit it previously, it didn't quite work out, so they undid that nerf to it, or fixed to the mechanics of it, but it's still on their radar, of course, so likely going to get touched. That's it. Hope you guys enjoyed this spiel, this review of the balance blog that has come out here today. Really interesting to get a peek behind the curtain of how the developers are approaching D3 at this late stage in its life. We're about to be 8 years into Diablo 3, which is just insanity. It's still as much fun to play now as it was day one, and arguably better. way better. Has come a long way. If you have any comments or things that you want to talk about that were in the blog, things that you react to positively, negatively, stuff you hope that comes in the future of the game, I definitely want to hear from you. So hop into the comments section, let me know what's on your mind. Let's talk about some D3. Keep an eye out again for PTR. It should be coming up relatively soon. So I will be back on my channel giving you guys videos covering everything that's happening within that. Make sure you subscribe so that you don't miss any of those. I would hate for you to miss them. I thank you greatly for catching up today and checking out this video. And I'll see you in the next one. Adios for now.